Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the online press conference to launch a new study by Fortify Rights and the Lowenstein International Human Rights Clinic at Yale Law School. My name is 𝙏𝙚𝙖 𝙾𝙤𝙪𝙡𝙙 or Zoom. I'm the communication specialist at Fortify Rights, and it's my great honor to serve as a moderator for this important discussion. Today, we're launching the news report titled "My Tears Could Make Us See: The Infliction of Mental Harm as Genocide Against Rohingya." The study reviews how serious mental health conditions caused by the Myanmar military-led attacks continue to destroy the Rohingya people in violation of the Genocide Convention. The study contains 88 pages of new information on how the infliction of mental harm and severe mental health conditions is indeed an act of genocide. It also demonstrates how mental harm can have a long-lasting effects and even be transferred intergenerationally, as well as the efforts to hold the Myanmar military accountable for its crimes. You can now download the study and our news release on our website, fortifyrights.org, and all of our social media platforms. We have shared the links to the full study and news release on the Zoom chat below as well. I would also like to give a special mention to our collaborator, Bangladeshi photographer Saiful Omi, for his powerful photography featured in the study. It is partly derived from Omi's collaborative project with Rohingya refugees to illustrate their mental health conditions through conceptualized photos. I recommend you check them out in the study. Really powerful work. Before starting, I would like to share some technical notes. We have a great panel of 6 speakers lined up for today's event. I have prepared some questions for each panelist who will be speaking about 5 to 7 minutes each, and we'll take audience questions at the end of the discussion. I would also like to remind you that this webinar is being recorded and broadcasting live on Fortify Rights, Facebook, YouTube, and X, formerly known as Twitter. So feel free to go to these channels if you want to rewatch the webinar. We also have simultaneous Burmese and Rohingya interpretation available for this event. So for those of you who are joining on Zoom, you can click at the globe logo on the menu bar to select the language you like to tune into. Please feel free to send in questions to our speakers by using the Q&A function on Zoom, or post them in the comment section if you are watching from our social media channels. Our team will help to pass on the questions to us. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce a wonderful panel of speakers with us today. I will introduce all of them based on their order of appearances. Firstly, we have Matthew Smith, CEO and co-founder at Fortify Rights. Matt has been working in Southeast Asia for more than 15 years, exposing genocide, crimes against humanity, and other human rights violations in the region. He will be sharing with us the background of this research that highlights the intersection of mental health and crime, the crime of genocide. Hi, Matt. Also with us is Saw Win, human rights specialist at Fortify Rights. Due to security concerns, Saw Win's camera will be off for the entire event. Saw Win has been investigating human rights violations against the Rohingya in Myanmar and Bangladesh with Fortify Rights. This study is participatory action research, and Saw Win is one of the lead researchers working with Rohingya refugees to conduct survey on their mental health. Hi, Saw Win.
Hi,
Also
everyone.
with us today is Aslan Suleiman, an attorney at Foley Hoek and counsel to the Gambia in the genocide case against the Myanmar military at the International Court of Justice, or ICJ. Aslan will give us an update on the ICJ case and the need for research on the mental health of genocide survivors. Hi, Aslan, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you.
Also with us this morning is Dr. Ambia Praveen, Rohingya activist and co-founder of Rohingya Medics Organization. Dr. Praveen has been involved in humanitarian assistance and medical support for Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh and other countries. Dr. Praveen will discuss her experiences tending to Rohingya refugees with mental health conditions and lay out some solutions to help Rohingya survivors cope with their mental health problems. Hi, Dr. Praveen, welcome. Last but not least, we have Panu Kin, a scholar born and raised in Myanmar and currently studying in the US as a clinical fellow and PhD candidate at Harvard Medical School, Mass General Hospital. Her clinical and research focus has been on trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, particularly in the context of political violence. Panu will give us a presentation on trauma and resilience in Myanmar following the 2021 military coup. Hi, Panu. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, thank you.
Okay, without further ado, I would like to open our discussion today with the context of this study. I want to begin this with a question to Fortify Rights CEO Matthew Smith. Matt, can you give us a background of this report, and when and why did you and your team at Fortify Rights start to work on the mental health issues of the Rohingya?
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Zoom. In conducting research that factored into the methodology of this report, we spoke with a 30-year-old Rohingya mother of 5. And during Myanmar military-led attacks in 2016 in Rakhine State, she had hidden a hole next to her house and witnessed the military and its operatives carry out a massacre in her village of Chalipara. Reflecting on her experience, she said, quote, "All of my tears could make a sea." As you'll see, this is the title of the study that we're publishing today with the team from Yale. And this quote, I think, represents the mental anguish, the severe depression, the traumatic stress that Rohingya people in Myanmar and Bangladesh have endured due to the violence inflicted on them. Before I get into a bit of the background and how this came together, the crime of genocide involves any of 5 prohibited acts committed against a protected group with the intent to destroy that group in whole or in part. Article 2 of the Genocide Convention defines the prohibited acts of genocide, one of which is causing, quote, "causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group." So while this study that we're publishing today focuses mostly on the attacks in 2016 and 2017 and their effects, with regard to the Rohingya and the trauma of mass atrocity crimes, of course, we're not merely talking about the genocidal attacks of those 2 years in particular, but rather decades of crimes committed with impunity. And these decades of impunity, of course, could be said for much of Myanmar, but the crimes perpetrated against Rohingya over the years have been distinct in a few ways. They've been distinct by the evidence of special intent to destroy the group in whole or in part, by the wholesale denials that the group exists, by the rampant genocidal discriminatory sentiment that was manufactured by primarily by the military and civilian political elite. Just a couple weeks after the full-scale attacks against Rohingya began in August 2017, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights referred to the situation as a textbook case of ethnic cleansing. So that was in September 2017. And to this day, that phrase is still often used to describe what the Rohingya people are going through. The High Commissioner was correct. It was ethnic cleansing, but ethnic cleansing is not defined. It's not a defined crime under international law like genocide. And since he made that statement in 2017, much more evidence has come to light. Fortify Rights published in-depth evidence and legal analysis in July 2018. exposing evidence of genocide with in-depth legal analysis. We also exposed how the genocide was planned and executed. That report, 160-page report, is called "They Gave Them Long Swords." That's also available online. Months later, that same year, in 2018, the UN fact-finding mission published a report of more than 400 pages, which found that the Rohingya were a protected group under the Genocide Convention. That report found that the military and others had committed 4 of the 5 prohibited acts of genocide against the Rohingya, and that those acts were committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part. So that was, in effect, a genocide determination. The fact-finding mission also called for prosecutions of those responsible. And since then, of course, the Gambia has brought a case at the International Court of Justice against Myanmar for genocide, which we'll hear more about today. And in 2021, the US government issued a genocide determination with regard to the situation of the Rohingya. So I mention this because I just want to make the point that words matter and the law matters. And if we ever hope to prevent genocide in this world, we do need to be able to diagnose it when we see it. Moreover, and of course, needless to say, no one knows better than the Rohingya people themselves that there have been forces attempting to destroy them as a people for many years with complete impunity. So going back to 2017 and 2018, when we were taking a fresh look at the law around the crime of genocide, it was first brought to my attention that courts and tribunals had struggled to define the contours of mental harm as genocide. I was unaware of that. And indeed, no one has ever been prosecuted for the standalone charge of inflicting mental harm as genocide. So with the aim of documenting the mental harm suffered by the Rohingya refugee population, a team of researchers, as Zoom mentioned, supported by Fortify Rights, interviewed nearly 500 Rohingya in the refugee camps in Bangladesh to document the violence that they had suffered and the effects of it. That was the participatory action research, which we'll also hear more about today from my colleague 𝙤𝙤𝙘. So with the aim of better understanding mental harm as an act of genocide, we brought that research and that data to Professor Jim Silk and his team at Yale Law School. That quantitative survey data, in addition to hundreds of pages of testimony provided by Rohingya survivors and eyewitnesses, formed the basis of the legal analysis in the study that we're publishing today. That survey data, in our view, is very important. It creates new knowledge about the many ways in which perpetrators have attempted to destroy the Rohingya people. As an example of the data, which you can read about in Chapter 2 of the study, nearly all of the surveyed refugees indicated surviving horrific experiences in Myanmar. 98.6% were exposed to frequent gunfire. 97.8% witnessed the burning and destruction of villages. 91.8% witnessed dead bodies, and 90.4% witnessed physical violence against others. So these are all traumatic events known to cause long-term mental health conditions such as post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and anxiety. The World Health Organization estimates that, in general, 10% of any adult population is affected by some type of moderate or mild mental health disorder. 12 months after a humanitarian emergency, this is expected to increase to 15 to 20% of the population. The data shows that the rates among Rohingya survivors in Bangladesh are dramatically higher. Among Rohingya survivors in the camps in Bangladesh, 61.2% report symptoms consistent with traumatic stress disorder, 88.7% report depression, and 84% report emotional distress. So I'll leave it there in terms of the background and how the study came to be in the hands of the team at Yale. Lastly, I would just like to take a moment to thank and honor everybody that was involved in collecting the data for this report, for the outstanding research by the Lowenstein Clinic at Yale Law School. I'd like to thank all of our esteemed speakers, not only for being here, but for being true champions of human rights. And I'd like to thank the supporters of Fortify Rights who make our work possible, and of course to everybody who took time out of your busy schedules to be here with us today. We're very grateful for you. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Matt, for your wonderful insights and setting the context of our discussion today. We will come back to you again for the key findings from the report and the recommendations as well in a later session. Now, I'd like to turn to Sawin, Human Rights Specialist at Fortify Rights. Sawin, you were one of the lead researchers conducting this participatory action research that formed the basis of this study. I understood you work with several Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh to collect the data. Can you explain the work that went into that?
Thank you, Zoom. Thank you, everyone, for here today. My name is Zawin, Human Rights Specialist at Fortify Rights, and I have been with Fortify Rights since 2016. Today, it is such an honor to be here as a speaker of this mental harm study launched today. I would like to thank everyone for joining us here today. My remarks would be to focus how we collected the testimonies from the Rohingya genocide survivors from Rakhine State, Myanmar. I, together with Matthew Smith, the CEO of our Fortify Rights, have conducted hundreds of interviews with Rohingya survivors who fled the genocidal attack in Myanmar military in Rakhine during 2016 and 2017. So part of my interviews with the Rohingya survivors are now in this important study by Fortify Rights and Yale Law Schools. As you know, Rohingya peoples have been facing restriction from every aspect in Myanmar, like freedom of movement, access to public health care, education, etc., since many decades. So as a result of that, they have to go through several mental harm on a daily basis. So worse is that they are not recognized the citizens of Myanmar, but they are considered as the stateless people. So after fleeing to Bangladesh, refugee camps in Cox's Bazar district, though their physical wounds have healed, they are still continue to experience several mental harms, impacts of genocide and mass atrocity crimes perpetrated by Myanmar in Myanmar, adversely impacting their daily lives and functioning in Bangladesh. As I'm working closely with the Rohingya community, I have a regular contact with the Rohingya refugees in Cox's Bazar and Rohingya refugee. So they quickly and easily get emotional and start crying when we begin to talk with them, and when they start to talk with us about their genocidal attack in their villages, when they recall how they lost their loved ones during the attack by Myanmar brutal military, despite it has been more than 6 years now. Besides, the Bangladesh Authority erected barbed wire fencing across the camps and literally restricted their movement of these Rohingya refugees in the camps, which is the similar situation that they face in Myanmar. There is a barely opportunity for the livelihood or educations for Rohingya refugees or Rohingya children in the camps. So along with the testimonies from 2016 and 2017, this study also made up of participatory actions research conducted by a 10 team Rohingya refugee researchers living in the refugee camps in Cox's Bazar district, Bangladesh. So with the technical support from a Fortify Rights consultant trained in quantitative methodologies and mental health, the Rohingya researchers team contributed to the design, implementation, and analysis of the research. All 10 team members were from Rakhine State, Myanmar. They are from the Rohingya refugees. So Fortify Rights also facilitated training on research methodology for Rohingya research teams, and the training includes sessions on research ethics, survey methodology, sampling, questionnaires development, interviewing techniques, smartphone training, referral process, and self-care. The Myanmar military, police, and civilian perpetrated act against Rohingya in 2016, 2017 that caused them serious mental harm. High rates of PTSD, anxiety, and depression among the Rohingya refugees who are forced to flee to camps in Bangladesh. And the Rohingya experienced torture and rape, witness extreme violence against others, suffer the separation of families, and were forcibly displaced from their homes. So I would like to not take that longer time because we have many speakers here. So I would like to conclude my last paragraph here. Till today, as you know, the Rohingya are living in the refugee camps in a very miserable lives with minimum support in the darkness with no better future for them. And that really create deterioration in their mental health. So I would like to say, like, as the saying goes, justice delayed, justice denied. So international community must need to put more effort to address this Rohingya crisis before it is too late. So I would like to thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sawin. Unfortunately, the Rohingya genocide is ongoing, and the physical and mental harm are being committed against the Rohingya as we speak. I just want to ask you about the recent developments regarding the Rohingya genocide in Myanmar and Bangladesh. Can you give us an update on the current situation?
Yeah, so thank you, Zooms. This is a very critical situation if you talk about Myanmar right now, because of the forceful conscription happening by the brutal military. The Rohingya peoples who still remain in Rakhine state are not able to sleep well, I mean, to stay at home. So they are being chased, followed by this military house by house to find and to catch them to use them forcibly for the military service against their wills. So at the same time, there are also other groups fighting in between, like even the economy is fighting against the brutal military. So they have to kind of displace time to time from their house, from their home to the other villages. So these are really on top of having genocides, but they are not still, they cannot take a rest. They are still on the runs. They are moving from place to places in order to save their lives. They are losing everything every day on a daily basis. So this is the very war situation, and also their movement have been totally blocked, totally restricted inside Myanmar. So it is, I can express in what, because we are tracking, monitoring the situation on a daily basis, what is going on inside. So it's very difficult. It's very worrying situation in Myanmar, in Rakhine state especially. And here in Bangladesh side, as I talked earlier, there are also certain specs of restrictions, kind of freedom of movement, educations, and livelihood. They have no opportunity here. So they are having similar situations that they have in their country back in Bangladesh. So it's very dark. It's very dark situations because they could see no future, so they cannot go back to Myanmar. They cannot see that they can go anytime soon back to Myanmar. So they are really facing problems, and that make them they are deteriorate their mental health really serious in the camps. So yeah, it is very unfortunate that we couldn't address this issue yet, the Rohingya crisis, but we must need to work together to put this as a priority issue for the Rohingya crisis. They are really suffering a lot, and as you see, 6 years already passed, but they are still having in the darkness with the minimum support. If you see the camp situation, how they are suffering is not expressible in words. So I would like to say that we really need to work together to expedite this process, to work with the Rohingya. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sawin, for your insights and also all the work that you do alongside the Rohingya community. Now, I'd like to come back to Fortify Rights CEO Matthew Smith to give us the key takeaways from the research My Tears Could Make Us See. The floor is yours, Matt.
Thanks so much, Zoom. Yeah, this portion of the discussion was originally supposed to be covered by Professor Jim Silk, and unfortunately, I'll be filling in for Jim. I'll do my best to do that. Jim's shoes are of course impossible to fill, but so in terms of this, some of the key findings in this study, I think, are in the legal chapter. And international case law has established that acts that result in lasting damage to the ability to lead a normal and constructive life can constitute mental harm as an act of genocide. But serious mental harm as genocide has generally been neglected in case law and human rights reports, as previously mentioned, even though it can by itself be a powerful means for destroying a group. I think there probably are a few reasons for this, why it's been neglected. Firstly, unlike physical wounds, mental harm is often not readily discernible. This makes it difficult to document. It's difficult to quantify or prove legally, even though its presence and destructive effects are deeply felt by targeted groups. Also, I would add that when the Genocide Convention was drafted in the 1940s, interestingly, it was China and India that insisted on including mental harm in Article 2 of the convention. And at that time, of course, the world knew much less about mental health and mental harm. And it is a credit to China and India that they insisted on including it in the convention. Regardless, the scientific community, of course, has come a long way since the 1940s in terms of knowledge about the destructive effects of trauma on mental health. And one hope that we have is that this study will help better align scientific and legal knowledge for future prosecutions of the infliction of mental harm as genocide. Tribunals investigating genocide have assessed mental harm separately from bodily injury, concluding that a finding of serious mental harm does not require the finding of physical harm. So in other words, the infliction of mental harm can be a standalone act of genocide. In addition, the ICTY found that forcible transfer and deportation of Bosnian Muslims from the Srebrenica enclave caused the victims to suffer serious mental and bodily harm. Tribunals also previously found that forcible transfer or deportation and trauma resulting from family separation can cause serious mental harm as an act of genocide. And as we all know, Rohingya families have long been separated due to the junta's attacks, due to the military's attacks, rather, and they have suffered forced deportation at an extreme scale. In 1998, when addressing the crime of genocide, the committee that was created by the UN to consolidate a draft convention for establishing the International Criminal Court stated that mental harm is, quote, understood to mean more than the minor or temporary impairment of mental faculties, end quote. As we've seen from the data collected and as you can read about in the study, Rohingya are suffering to this day severe impairment of mental faculties as a direct result of actions by the Myanmar military and its operatives. Also, I think a very important aspect of this study that I would encourage people to take a look at is the focus on the transmission of intergenerational trauma. Intergenerational trauma involves the offspring of trauma survivors experiencing their own trauma symptoms at rates higher than expected. Recent research into adverse childhood experiences and intergenerational trauma suggests that disruptions to everyday life caused by things like PTSD, depression, emotional distress can persist throughout a lifetime, and they can even be passed down to younger generations. So the long-lasting mental harm perpetrated against a defined group can contribute to the destruction of that group and thus provide further evidence that the acts causing the harm constitute genocide. So as you'll see in the study, traumatizing events are capable not only of producing trauma symptoms in the individuals who first experience these events, but their results can actually reverberate through subsequent generations. This type of trauma, intergenerational trauma, was initially studied in the context of the children of Holocaust survivors. And researchers are still exploring and seeking to understand intergenerational trauma and the extent to which it occurs. The research has shown effects beyond the second generation. Current understanding of intergenerational trauma indicates that the trauma and violence afflicted on the Rohingya by the Myanmar authorities, unfortunately, will likely produce trauma in future generations. One scholar, as mentioned in the study, there's one scholar that defines historical trauma as, quote, a collective complex trauma inflicted on a group of people who share a specific group identity or affiliation, ethnicity, nationality, and religious affiliation, end quote. The Rohingya are, of course, they share both ethnicity and religious affiliation, and the violence in Myanmar that targeted them and continues to target them is due to these specific characteristics. The impact of intergenerational transmission of trauma has been documented in a variety of populations that have been exposed to trauma, including the children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, First Nations and Native American communities, Vietnam War veterans, Cambodian survivors of the Khmer Rouge, and survivors of the genocides in Armenia, Rwanda, and Yugoslavia. So there's this rich body of scientific empirical findings to learn from. The likelihood that trauma symptoms will surface in subsequent generations of Rohingya, as in other populations that experience mass atrocities, really does underscore the importance and the means of applying the Genocide Convention. If traumatic effects occur beyond a single lifetime, this would surely meet the longevity component of serious mental harm under the Genocide Convention. In addition, research indicates that traumatic symptoms experienced by subsequent generations are often severe enough to damage the ability to lead a normal and constructive life, which of course is relevant to the Genocide Convention. Lastly, although the existence of intergenerational trauma effects is undisputed, psychiatrists and neuroscientists, as you can read in the study, are still exploring its boundaries. Researchers have found a variety of mechanisms for how intergenerational transmission of trauma might occur. For example, intergenerational trauma might be transmitted through altered behavior and environmental effects. It might be transmitted through trauma narratives, and potentially biologically through changes to the epigenome. All of these aspects and more are included in the study published today. And again, we would encourage you to have a look at it. So I'll leave it there. Back over to you, Zoom. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Matt. I wonder if you know, like the study actually talks about intergenerational trauma that continue to have a lasting impact, long-lasting impact on the Rohingya people. I wonder how crucial it is for us, you know, to understand how these trauma figure in the lives of genocide survivors.
I think it is crucial. It's absolutely crucial. And again, you know, going back to the 1940s when the Genocide Convention was being drafted and conceptualized, there really was very little knowledge about these things. Intergenerational trauma, as we understand it today, was largely unknown. And so I think these scientific empirical findings related to Holocaust survivors, you know, Native American communities, survivors of other genocides can be instructive. Those studies can help understand what the Rohingya people are going through now. And I think, I hope, could be useful for holding the perpetrators of this genocide accountable.
Thank you, Matt. Next, I'd like to give the floor to Aslan Suleiman, who is advising the Gambia in its genocide case against the Myanmar military at the International Court of Justice, or ICJ. Aslan, could you give us an update on the ICJ case?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much. And I just want to congratulate Fortify Rights and the Yale Center on the release of this very important report. In terms of the ICJ case, we are nearing the last part of the written phase of the proceedings. So just to recap really quickly, as you know, the Gambia initiated this case in November of 2019. And when it did so, it asked for provisional measures from the court. And there was a hearing and an order issued by the court in January of 2020. That was the first phase of the case. The next phase of the case was when Myanmar filed for preliminary objections. They tried to have the case dismissed. And that filing happened early, just a few days, about 10 days or so before the coup, actually. And then there was a hearing on that, and the court issued a judgment rejecting those preliminary objections. We're in the third phase of the case, the merits phase. So this is where the parties have submitted their written pleadings, their briefs on the case. The Gambia submitted in October of 2020, actually, its memorial, its affirmative case. Myanmar last August submitted its counter memorial, its defense. Next month, on May 16th, the Gambia will file its reply brief, which is responding to Myanmar's defense. And then Myanmar will have one last opportunity to file a brief called a rejoinder, and that the deadline for that is currently scheduled for December 16th of this year. And after those two briefs are filed, the Gambia's reply and Myanmar's rejoinder, then the court will be in a position to schedule a hearing on the merits. So we anticipate that at some point next year, in 2025, the court would schedule a hearing on the merits of the Gambia's allegation that Myanmar has violated its obligations under the Genocide Convention by committing acts of genocide against the Rohingya. And so that's where we are in terms of the status of the case.
Thank you, Aslan. What are your thoughts after reading this study, and what do you make of the mental health aspects of the Rohingya genocide? Do you think that, the knowledge about mental harm can contribute to justice?
I think the report is a really important contribution to the understanding of genocide and its many effects and its many different manifestations. As Matt was discussing in his remarks, it is absolutely true that the element of mental harm, which is a potential standalone act of genocide, is often overlooked or sort of treated as sort of an afterthought. And I think this report will go a long way towards bringing attention to that and bringing more thought on that particular element as a distinct element and act of genocide that can be adopted or shown in various cases and accountability processes that are seeking to establish genocide. So, I think the average person, when they think of genocide, they're thinking of deaths, right? They're thinking of people who are killed. And I think this report makes a very important contribution to focus on the other ways in which genocide can affect a group and can affect the survival of a group. And I think that's important because there's so many different ways in which certainly the Rohingya have experienced the genocidal acts of the Myanmar state. And so I think this is a really important way of providing more substance and attention and focus on that particular element.
Thank you, Aslan, for your remarks and insights. I also like to take this opportunity to welcome everyone who are watching here on Zoom and on our social media platforms. I like to say that we are broadcasting live on Facebook in 3 languages, English, Burmese, and Rohingya languages. And we also broadcasting live on Twitter and YouTube as well. So if you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to comment in the section, to leave comments in the comment section. And for those of you who are watching here on Zoom, you can also use the Q&A function to post some questions to us as well. Next, I'd like to bring our focus to the current support for Rohingya refugees. I'd like to turn to Dr. Praveen, Rohingya activist and co-founder of Rohingya Medics organization. Dr. Praveen has been offering medical and humanitarian support to Rohingya refugees, including those with mental health conditions. Dr. Praveen, what are your thoughts after reading this study? And are some of the mental health problems included in the study common in the Rohingya community?
Thank you, Fortify Rights, and thank you for the invitation. I'm very much privileged to be part of it, which is really my main focus on the mental harm and the mental hygiene of our community, Rohingyas. Nevertheless, I would like to congratulate Fortify Rights for your tremendous continuous contributions, not only to the Rohingya, but also to our motherland, Myanmar. This is not the first time that Fortify Rights is focusing on the mental issues, which is been neglected by many international NGOs or NGOs, even in the jurisdiction system, which is a very, very important, as many of you has already mentioned, that it's not only the to bring a community wiped from this world or to occur any genocide. It's not only the physical harm, it's not only the with the jurisdiction, but it's also how the mental harm can affect and can huge contributions to the genocide. And on the other side, I'm also not astonished with the outcomes of this study, though it is late, like almost we said 6 years. I will not say it's only the 6 years, but also for the last decades and decades, because the Rohingyas were targeted mentally and physically by deprivation from their every basic human rights. It's not happened in 2017 or in 2018 or 2012, but it has been happening, as I've said earlier, for decades. So so for our generation, intergenerational trauma is also not a new. There were several times when I and some of our Rohingyas have spoke about it, and we are very much thankful to the Fortify Rights to bringing up and focusing on it. And the percentages that the Matthew has mentioned, it is really, if I go back with their last visit to the camp, that was last year, and my last visit was last week or this week, the consequences and the impacts of the genocide on these community, to the Rohingya, you can see that it's really increasing. So I hope that the international community and Bangladesh government and people like who are engaged or the organizations with the ICC, ICJ, that they will take this report seriously and they will focus on it.
Dr. Praveen, what are some of the mental health support being provided for the Rohingya refugees in the camp and elsewhere, and what else is needed right now?
Okay, Zoom, thank you for this question. Though the question sounds very interesting, but it is really very empty. When we talk about the mental harm, we only think about the people who are living in Bangladesh or who are living in Myanmar. No, the diaspora even, we are also facing a lot of issues with the mental harm because, as we said, it's not only about the direct, but also though we might not be on the ground, but we are also indirectly have the impacts of genocide and the atrocities going among our community and still ongoing genocide. How it impacts, like we get the informations, we watch the informations, we hear the cries, we see the photos, there is a transfer, or the intergenerational trauma is there. And our symptoms are triggered when we see our community is still suffering, when we see that the jurisdiction system is still very slow, when we see that the ongoing is still going on, when we see that our atrocities are not well focused, or it just shifts from one atrocity to another atrocity, when our sufferings are not well focused on, and also at the same time we don't see that it's improving our situations, rather it is deteriorating. As I've said, it's not only that the mental issues that we are talking, not on the victims or the survivors living in Bangladesh or in Myanmar, but also with the diasporas. We are also going through such symptoms. On the other side, really very rare, a very small number of people are having the luxury of this coping system or having the trauma therapy. Some of us might not show that we are suffering from these symptoms, post-traumatic stress disorder, though our majority of our community went through the traumas, but that does not mean that they are suffering only the post-traumatic stress disorder, but other mental issues like depression you have mentioned earlier, or the report has mentioned, anxiety disorders, emotional dysregulations, and so on. And on the ground, and also in Myanmar, due to the ongoing genocide, and also the political and the civil war in Myanmar at the moment, there is no such psychosocial therapy or trauma therapy available for our Rohingyas, especially also in Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, though the persecution and deprivation of our basic human rights not only occurred in Myanmar, but it continues in Bangladesh as well. Our traumas have been triggered daily. Our mental harm has been triggered daily. And on the other side, we don't have a proper trauma therapy. And also there is no, nobody's focusing really how to give the Rohingya the proper coping system. Rather, we have been deprived further from the basic human rights in Bangladesh. So in general, what I wanted to say, that this luxury therapy is not available in Bangladesh, it's not available, it's in Myanmar, even it's not available with the diasporas who are living. Like, we are running the organizations, we are the one who are coping on our own self. We don't have enough funds, we don't have enough people who can really work on or supervise on our mental harm and mental hygiene. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Praveen. You talked about the lack of support for mental health of Rohingya people. What would be the solutions to address these problems in your views?
Zoom, when the Rohingyas came in 2017 or flee Myanmar, most of us were focusing on the jurisdiction, how to get the testimonies, and if somebody that we see with our eyes that somebody is bleeding or having the wounds and all those, we were focusing on that, but nobody has focused on the long terms of genocide acts on our neuropsychological development. Our children were deprived, and they never had a safe atmosphere, which continues further. And to give us the proper, or to take care of these vulnerable people, it is very much important that they get the enough attention, that that the people understand the core root of this cause, and then that the international community, despite of in other areas of the world, like in Ukraine or in Palestine, that people should not forget to focus on the Rohingya cause, and also that there should be also the jurisdiction system should be speed up, because it is like we know that in the history it has taken years and years, but we have enough evidences. It's not only the evidences on the testimonies, but also on the medical issues or the other issues, but on the testimonies of the mental harm also. So I hope that they will focus and they will speed up, because you can see that the Rohingyas situation is not improving. It's rather getting worse. And still we are unwanted. We are still unwanted by our motherland. We are still not on the priority list in the international community, or we are not still in the unwanted everywhere. And this not being giving attention to our cause, it's harming us further. And despite that, in Bangladesh, as I've said, we are very thankful to the Bangladesh, whatever they are doing with their small country. But nevertheless, we have been deprived further. Our children, especially, that I feel they are already lost generation, have been deprived further from education, from the mental hygiene, from the medical issues, and from moving around normally or properly in the camps. They are still under the barbed wires. They are restricted from every movement, from health issues and further on. So therefore, it is very much important that these vulnerable people should be taken serious, that their sufferings should be taken serious. Instead of saying that these are resilient, these are resistance, no doubt, but still, we should not misuse these terms on these people, and we should try our utmost best to help this community, especially our young generations and our youth. And above all these things, it is very much important that that our youth or our children should be provided with the education. People should understand the absolute need of the education for our Rohingya community, so that we will be able to contribute further in the jurisdiction, in our health issues, in our stabilizing our political issues or system in Myanmar. That one day, today or tomorrow, majority of us would really love to go back to our country and contribute as much as we can. And for the time being, till the repatriation is not possible, resettlement should be considered. And as I've said, the trauma therapy should be focused, and the mental harm should be focused also, and try to give the maximum stability to our people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Praveen, for sharing your experiences and views on solutions. Now I'd like to give the floor to Panu Kin, PhD candidate and clinical fellow at Mass General Hospital, Harvard Medical School. Panu has been focusing, studying trauma and resilience in the context of the recent Myanmar political struggle. Hi, Panu.
Hello. Thank you so much, Zoom. And I am honored to be a part of this fantastic panel. And we just wanted to thank everyone who already spoke, and also this report is incredibly important when I think about my work in resilience, and which I will talk more about in a little bit, the importance of fighting towards the justice and accountability, and documents like this is that really one important step towards resilience. Yeah.
Panu, can you tell us a bit more about your work, the focus of the research, and why is there is a need to understand trauma and resilience in the context of Myanmar?
Absolutely. So I want to echo what Dr. Perveen beautifully said, that, trauma therapy is actually, unfortunately, feels like a luxury and like out of access for our whole community, especially for Rohingya community, where there's like, no resources, as well as like providers, who can, one, the providers themselves are also victims of the crimes and like mental suffering. It's really difficult to provide that kind of like community support. So for me, what I became really interested in while I was learning trauma-focused therapy in my PhD program in the United States, and then the military coup was staged in 2021, and I realized many of the evidence-based trauma therapy needs a lot of adaptation when we are supporting communities like Rohingya survivors, because unfortunately, we don't even get to the point of like post-trauma. The traumatic events have never passed. It's ongoing, chronic, and complex, never just like one traumatic event. So I was really interested in learning more about, how do our communities talk about trauma reactions, as well as like resilience, strategies of resilience that we already exist for survival. And how can we foster them more in order to support the community? So I collected online data from Myanmar coup survivors. It's for doctoral dissertation research, so it's pretty small, but even in the small sample, I was able to collect a small number of Rohingya participants through my collaborators. I'm really grateful to sort of highlight their experiences and sources of resilience as well today.
Yeah, Panu. So in your research, you talk about how to address trauma and building resilience as well. Can you share with us a bit more about your findings, and maybe, what are some of the individual and collective practices that the Rohingya genocide survivors can do to strengthen their resilience and survival skills?
Thank you, Zoom. I really appreciate you asking the question that in that two parts of like individual as well as collective. So just like earlier, first let me start by defining resilience, that, when we think about psychological resilience, it's both the process and the outcome of learning to adapt to extremely difficult life experiences. And it can manifest through mental, emotional, and like behavioral coping skills. And one thing that I want to really emphasize here is that, resilience does not mean that the absence of mental suffering or mental health symptoms. Like in this context of like our Rohingya survivors, it's not possible to, take away the suffering, and like, of course, PTSD, depression, anxiety, Dr. Perveen talked about is, going to be ongoing amid these humanitarian crisis and genocide. So resilience in this context, according to the existing research, psychological research with other genocide survivors, like in Rwanda, what we have learned is it's more about thinking about functioning and the survival skill. So we all know how incredibly resilient Rohingya community is, right? Like decades of, crimes against humanity and genocide. So even survival itself shows how this community is already incredibly resilient. The fact that, right, like perpetrators of violence or military is trying to erase the whole community, and the fact that we are still here shows how incredibly resilient this community is. So that's my idea of like collective resilience. Amid ongoing crisis, it's really often not sufficient to think about individual resilience alone. So, just like we've been talking about throughout the webinar, sort of really bringing justice and accountability is a part of collective resilience building. And I really think like we are all as humans responsible and like to be contributing to that sort of collective resilience. So I was actually, reading through the report that the title of like my tier could make a C is like, that one survivor's account, and how much more like mental suffering of C is out there. And, so metaphorically, I'm thinking about, can we help build this like, psychological safety areas? Like it could be a boat, so that the communities can stay afloat until justice comes, right? So that's how I think about resiliency, as in what are the, even though the whole community, larger society is not safe right now, can we think about micro level of like safety and belonging and honoring, the intergenerational, of course, trauma and suffering, but it also comes with intergenerational wisdom and resilience. So sort of like, those are sort of our lifeboats, and like, until justice can come. So I think about collective resilience as all of us are responsible, and it can look, like what Dr. Praveen is really talking about, both within the diaspora community, Bangladesh community, Myanmar community, all of the Rohingya community and the stakeholders working together to be very, very creative about how can we think about, sort of like a different layers, not just from the, at the camp. What about the schools, when we are able to have school? So, and what about like within families? How about medical clinics? This report is an example of like sort of thinking about a whole person approach of like thinking about genocide consequences. So collective resilience informs individual resilience. They go together. So, and I like to share briefly about Zoom, like what I've learned regarding individual resilience factors, like especially in Myanmar context, again, including some of our Rohingya participant, voices, but this is for like the whole Myanmar military coup survivor communities. Let's see. I am gonna try to share my screen. Are you able to see it? Okay, let me start from again. Okay. So sources of resilience, I asked this question to the military coup survivors that on the most difficult day since the coup began, what helped you to keep going? What are the sources of your resilience to get out of the bed, to keep moving forward? And as we can see here, we are a collectivist culture, so like community, family, friends, and believing in sort of revolution of justice are like, so the bigger words respond to the higher frequency of like sources of resilience by the participants. So spirituality. So I share about this as in before we're able to do trauma therapy, really trying to understand what are our existing strategies of our coup survivors, including Rohingya survivors. So, I really appreciate that we already talk about intergenerational trauma, and it's important to sort of also another thing I want to highlight is by talking about resilience, we don't ever want to erase the suffering. That is not a goal. Of course, people are going to be suffering, but also really to almost find a sense of pride. Oh, we are still here, right? Like decades of like violence and, atrocities, and the fact that we are still here. So one participant, for example, talk about my grandparents lived through the similar war, or, maybe genocide for Rohingya community, and we are still here. Why can't we make it too? So like trying to instill the sense of hope as much as we can. And then, so I'm reminded of my favorite author, Viktor Frankl, who is a Holocaust survivor, and also a psychiatrist himself. So one quote he said, one of his well-known, quotation goes that, one, we are not able to change the situations. We are challenged to change ourselves. So I think about, our Rohingya communities and survivors within Myanmar are really trying to change how we cope with this trauma and like horrific suffering that is not ending yet, as Dr. Praveen talked about. It's still ongoing. And what can we still do even amid all of those crises? So really the most important research finding we found is social support, the fact that, people to be reminded of that you are never alone. Like, your community, your friends, like, the people who love you and care about you are also in this together. It's really important. it's difficult to talk about taking care of yourself and well-being when a war is ongoing, and still, really important for us to, I actually ask my patients to come up with their own resilience plan. It's very different for everyone. It could be like every day trying to take deep breaths. It could be like 5 minutes of prayers. It could be like talking to your grandma. Whatever gives you resilience, we have to make it very concrete. So some of my patients have resilience plan on their fridge. So they wake up and they don't forget to pray and talk to grandma and breathe, right? Like, so really important to have that kind of like plan ongoing. And there are, of course, many resilience factors. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go into all of these details, but one thing I really want to highlight is, especially for our Rohingya community, we see the contribution of helping others is really a major source of resilience. So for our communities like Rohingya, like we are not just trauma victims. We are like, often change makers, community leaders, like Dr. Perveen. She is a great figure of like resilience, right? Like you are, not just the victim. So sort of trying to understand that, of course, some of us are working in advocacy legal realm, but you could just be a mom or grandma and you are the leader of this community or your life. Right, like so sort of trying to help that psychological perspective shift, that our resilience is about our communities to not be sank in all of this suffering when the military is trying to erase us. Our resilience is really trying to learn everything we can to fight it through step by step, is what I have like learned from my research and clinical work so far. Let me pause here not to waste too much time.
Thank you, Panu. Before we go into another session about the recommendations from the report, maybe Panu, can you give us some brief recommendations in terms of trauma and resilience that medical practitioners, stakeholders, and the international community can provide to the Rohingya community?
Yeah, thank you, Zoom. So, from this research, going back to that collective resilience and how we are all responsible, I think a lot about, investment in funding, education, mental health support is really critical for the Rohingya community, so that when we think about resilience, the burden is not on the survivors. The burden should not be on the survivors to foster their own resilience. So how can we bring in sort of like, support in terms of money and fight, mental health resources and practitioners internationally is really, really important. And I will also say that one international kind of like experts and clinicians and stakeholders were to help Rohingya, I really urge them to learn from the community first too. There's a lot of wisdom from the community, and I will urge them to also learn about how do we talk about trauma in a very culturally relevant way. Even within Rohingya community, there might be differences between how one family or one individual think about their own resilience as the other person. So for my own trauma therapy, I think, well, there is no one size fits all. Every patient, every family is so different, and I really want to learn from them, especially if you're not a part of the community. And so I really like to urge that as like international stakeholders, it's not top down. Like you are not just serving, you're also learning from the community, and how can you make it sort of sustainable long term. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Panu, for your wonderful insights and presentation. Now I'd like to hand the mic back to Matthew Smith, CEO at Fortify Rights, for his final remarks, and to discuss the recommendations from our report. The floor is yours, Matt.
Thank you so much, Zoom. And thanks everyone for these brilliant discussions and presentations. So the study, I'll just briefly mention the recommendations for the study. There are 35 recommendations to relevant parties. This includes the Myanmar military junta, the National Unity Government of Myanmar, UN member states, humanitarian organizations who are providing aid to Rohingya genocide survivors. We do at Fortify Rights, needless to say, we believe in the importance of accountability for mass atrocity crimes. We believe in the importance of the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court as institutions. Excuse me. And accountability Accountability for crimes is, of course, inherently important, but there's also empirical evidence that efforts to achieve international justice can have a deterrent effect. So we are recommending that ICC member states refer the situation in Myanmar to the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court under Article 14 of the Rome Statute. The court is currently authorized to only investigate the crime of forced deportation against Rohingya from Myanmar to Bangladesh. The court is not authorized to investigate the full spectrum of atrocity crimes that are occurring all throughout Myanmar, and we do feel very strongly that that needs to change, particularly with regard to the atrocity crimes that have been occurring since the coup in 2021. Also, just weeks after Russian forces initiated the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, 43 ICC member states referred the situation in Ukraine to the International Criminal Court and the chief prosecutor. This, of course, led to a full investigation and, as of now, 4 arrest warrants. So in the context of Myanmar, it's been almost 3 years since the National Unity Government gave jurisdiction to the ICC, and not a single ICC member state has referred the situation to the chief prosecutor. We do feel that that's a moral and strategic failure that ICC member states can rectify through a simple act of sending a 1-paragraph referral letter to the prosecutor at the court. So we are recommending that recommendation from Fortify Rights, and the Lowenstein Clinic at Yale Law School is in the study that's published today. We're also recommending that UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, and humanitarian agencies receive the resources that they need to protect Rohingya in Bangladesh, and also that they expand the staff of mental health workers, as Panu just mentioned, as an important issue. We're recommending that they expand the staff of mental health workers in the camps in Bangladesh. We're recommending that they expand the network of transit centers and safe houses in the refugee camps in Bangladesh for refugees who are needing urgent life-saving protection. And unfortunately, those numbers are increasing on a daily basis due to violence and other threats in the camps in Bangladesh. We are recommending also that they improve access to basic goods and services within the transit centers, including access to psychosocial and mental health care, which are currently lacking. There are more recommendations in the study, and we would invite everyone to have a look at those. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Matt, for discussing the recommendations from the report. I am now going to open up the floor for questions. Just a reminder that we are collecting questions from Zoom and all of our social media platforms. You can ask the questions on the Q&A function or post them on the comment section of the social media live streams. And if you're on Zoom and would like to directly ask the question, please click the raise hand button and we'll unmute your microphone. When asking a question, please do identify yourself and your affiliation and indicate to whom you would like to direct the question to. However, we would be giving priority to working journalists, so please identify yourself if you are a member of the media. Okay, questions have come in. So there are some questions about the ongoing genocide. We have questions from Meng La Jaw, who asks, the current situation of the Rakhine State is under horrific genocide because they are facing both persecution from the genocidal military, Myanmar military, and unwanted armed group. Beverly Baxter's asks, what can you share about the reports, the BBC reports that Rohingya men are now being forced into conscription into the Burmese army? Wendell Glenn asks, how can we concretely and institutionally end the genocide against Rohingya? So yeah, on these questions regarding the ongoing genocide, I wonder if anyone want to take these questions to answer on, what's going on and what could be the solution to end the ongoing genocide.
Yeah, I can take this one. So I think, as I mentioned earlier during my remarks, the situation is really critical in terms of the forceful conscription by the military. So in terms of, despite there is several attempts to try to stop these sort of brutal violations and abuses against its people in Myanmar, but we could do very little, we can say. But so I think we should really need to refer this brutal military to ICC as soon as possible in our collaborative effort. Then this is the only solution. Otherwise, they are not listening to anyone. As you see now, the ICJ already put the provisional measures, but they are really violating these things. They are not taking care of, following that, and they're still doing their own whatever they want. They have been doing for decades. So I think this is the, as you know, Asan is here also, so he knows well about the latest update development from ICJ case, and also we really need to refer these the militaries to ICC. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Somin. We have another question from an anonymous attendee who says, I'd like to ask how the study interprets Article 2 of the Convention. Would it be a valid interpretation to require intent to commit mental harm? Does the study include that mental harm against Rohingya is intentional, separate, and not simply a result of bodily, physical injury or trauma? If such is the case, how should intergenerational trauma, collective mental harm, be assessed as a standalone act of genocide? Matt, wonder if you want to take this.
Yeah, so there's I think for questions that are specific to the documentation around the special intent to destroy, I would recommend not only looking at this study, but there's an in-depth section on the intent that was documented with regard to the attacks in 2016, 2017. In the Fortify Rights report, they gave them long swords, which was published in July 2018. There are a lot of other resources also online, the FFM report and other documentation with regard to intent. I think so. I guess one way to think about it is basically improving genocide. There are the three components. So is the targeted group a protected group? And were any of the 5 acts, prohibited acts of genocide committed? And then were they committed with this special intent to destroy in whole or in part? So in that sense, one would not necessarily need to prove, my understanding at least, one would not necessarily need to prove special intent for mental harm specifically, just that there was special intent to destroy, and that mental harm was one of the acts and perpetrated. And as you can see in the report, there has been some limited jurisprudence on this, but also it's elaborated on a bit in the report that mental harm can be a standalone act of genocide. It does not have to be, while it's included in Article 2B of the Genocide Convention with bodily harm, so it's bodily or mental harm, the two do not need to be connected. So in other words, you don't necessarily have to prove both bodily and mental harm. Mental harm in and of itself can be a standalone act of genocide. I hope that answers the question. I'm not sure if it answers, but I would welcome others' thoughts on that as well.
I wonder if anyone would like to answer this question as well.
Okay. I don't know, the enormous guy who has question, or the gentleman, you have to understand that you don't have to kill somebody only physically. You can kill them also when you kill their soul. And killing soul can be through the mental harm. This is a community who has been deprived by decades and decades by depriving them from the normal basic human rights. And whether it's intentionally done or not intentionally done, that comes later. But if you take a group or an individual, you deprive them from basic human rights, free of movement, moving freely, educating normal, taking the health issues, and engaging with the community, and all the stuff, But if you deprive them, what kind of and not giving them a safe zone or a stable atmosphere, their health issues or their psycho-neurological development will be affected. So this is a community which has been deprived systematically from by their government or by their motherland systematically, and the impacts of these will be will be seen. Like, for example, 2017, when we had a huge number of fleeing from Myanmar to Bangladesh, people were busy with the testimonies. Those days, you might have seen only the physical wounds. But as you see right now, after 6 years, you can see people are already mentally disturbed. They're recalling the traumas that they have lived or they have faced. And this is enough evidence to show that this community were deprived from their basic rights, and they were intentionally harmed not to function further. So as I've said, the mental harm you cannot see in 1 day, 2 days, 6 weeks. It comes slowly. And with my first visit in the camp in 2019, and then the latest visits, I can see that those days people were not talking about it. People were talking about certain things, and the mental issues were not the priorities, and the symptoms were not that much prominent. Now, in this last week when I came, really from 64%, the PTSD symptoms have increased, and this report also shows that 90%, which is already why these people were the impacts of this deprivation from their basic rights. So these are the impacts, and this was intentionally done on this community not to be able to function and not to be function properly, and then not only physically to harm them, but also mentally harm them, and that is enough to deprive them from their basic human rights.
Thank you, Dr. Praveen. There is another question related to the methodology of this report. Shanmei, sorry if I don't pronounce correctly, Shanmei Terry asks, how can we prove intergenerational trauma? How did you collect data for that trauma? I think this question is for either Matt or Selwyn.
Sorry. Yeah, please go ahead.
You want to go, Zoen?
No, Matt, please go on. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, great question. How can we prove intergenerational trauma? I think well, one of the recommendations in the study is for for humanitarian agencies to conduct long-term longitudinal studies of the Rohingya. It's too early now, of course, to know how, for example, the violence inflicted in 2016 and 2017 is going to affect generations in the future. As mentioned, there's quite a lot of findings and studies that would appear to indicate that the Rohingya people will unfortunately suffer this type of trauma, not necessarily as a whole, but there is evidence, empirical evidence that would lend credence to the idea that the Rohingya will be suffering this type of trauma. And yeah, so in terms of how we can go about understanding that, there really should be more studies on that. Now is certainly the time to do that and to build on the quantitative data that the Rohingya research team collected. In terms of how we collected data with regard to intergenerational trauma, I guess the short answer is that we didn't. The data that was collected was really about the trauma, the effects of trauma and the psychological impacts of what the Rohingya people are going through right now. And so the study did not specifically focus, the data collected in the study didn't specifically focus on that. But again, when you look at that data, and then when you look at the data that's been collected from other contexts throughout the last several decades, there are strong indications that the Rohingya will be suffering intergenerational trauma.
Thank you, Matt. Actually, there is another question on the methodology from Mazadu Noyan, special correspondent of Barta 24, a media of Bangladesh. Do you have any separate data about Rohingya women on facing mental harm issues? What would be the key findings of that, as they would be more vulnerable to mental health as well? And what would be the recommendation to address the mental trauma for women in the camps?
Well, I would love to hear from other speakers on this, but I would invite whoever asked the question to take a look at chapter 2 in the study, and you can glean from some of the data specific aspects that affected women. Women were, of course, a large portion of the survey respondents, and in terms of things such as sexual violence, for example, it was collected. There is data that women and men suffered severe sexual violence by Myanmar military forces and their operatives. But there are some aspects of the data that speak specifically to the experiences of Rohingya women, and again, that's available in chapter 2 of the report. But again, I would invite Dr. Praveen or others if they would like to comment on
that. I have noticed that majority of the international community are focusing mainly on the women. No doubt that we women have suffered the most. But on the other side, we should also not forget that our men have suffered also enough. We always think that if somebody is suffering directly, it means if a woman has been raped, it means a man is not responsible. He did not show any reactions, and he's not traumatized, and he's not been abused. I think this concept is somewhere. I feel it's not correct, because if my sister has been raped, though I am not physically, being a brother, for example, it will also trigger. And I have been also abused, though I'm not the direct victim. So as I've said, it is true that the women of the Rohingya society, or even the worldwide women, are always the answering tools of sufferings in every war zones or in conflicts, and children, and with the Rohingya community also at the same time. But on the other side, a person should not forget that our brothers, our male defenders, who have not directly went through the traumas, but they are also have been, their mental harm has been also triggered through their loved ones, female loved ones been harmed, And also on the other side, we are a community where we protect our women, and when our women are not protected, there is also a social and the community triggering factors that triggers us also, though we are not female. So therefore, I would love to request the international community not only all the time only focusing because our women have answered or suffered the most physically. That does not mean that our men has not also suffered mentally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Praveen. We have another one question from our Facebook live stream. I think this one might go to Panu. So this person asks that many patients in our healthcare clinics are diagnosed with PTSD and other mental disorder, and they feel better for 2 or 3 years after taking the medicine. But their symptoms relapse again and again. What is the reason for relapsing?
Thank you, Zoom. I think about this, like, what we've been talking about this whole webinar of like the mental harm, or like the, like sometimes we will also call this like almost psychological torture, like, the one that perpetrators intentionally try to destroy or erase a community. Even if you have sort of almost addressed your own trauma wounds, either through medication or therapy or both, it's not over yet. Like you can get re-triggered those past wounds, or like even can get another compounded trauma from witnessing, somebody you love being harmed or killed. And then, the part about mental harms, I also wanted to add is that it really make survivors feel like really basically like the loss of identity and like loss of like any sense of capacity to take care of themselves or to take care of their loved ones. So that sort of erasure of a community can affect anybody who is still alive. So they can also really struggle with survivor guilt, like like if they are still surviving, trying to do their best to heal their trauma, and if they were to see somebody else in their worst situations, they might be re-triggered by that kind of wounds, or like they might feel really guilty of like, is that okay? Even from the same community, like I am feeling better. So actually survivor guilt is one of the risk factors of like re-triggering some of the past wounds, that maybe it's not okay that my symptoms are getting better while my community is like getting erased. So it's like that sort of like psychological guilt. Military also intentionally provokes that by erasing, like the sense of any personal sense of identity. So like those can be very common, I would say.
Thank you so much, Panu. We have a question on the advocacy for mental health of the Rohingya. Yeah, an anonymous attendee said, Rohingya communities face a diverse range of challenges with pressing needs like shelter and food. Often the issue of mental health is put on the back burner. How do we do better in advocating for more attention towards mental health? I wonder if anyone would like to take this one.
Okay. It is very important that the Rohingyas, not only the Rohingyas, in worldwide, if we just sit right now, we all can see that the mental harm or the issues with the mental harm is increasing. It's not only the victims who are suffering or the survivors, but also in worldwide with the chaos that we have, and we are unable to function properly. The long-term COVID has affected us. Now the war in different areas, the conflicts in different areas, the economical issues, and all these factors are harming us. And on the other other side, with the Rohingya community or with the Myanmar, where we are directly affected because of the ongoing genocide, because the military has still the hold of the country, and you know, in the Rohingyas who are living in different areas, we have empathy and solidarity with the Palestinians, with the Ukrainians, because we live the same life and they have been living right now. And then in Bangladesh, our situation is not it's not getting better, you know, it's deteriorating rather. So therefore, we all have to function as a global citizen, as the people who are focusing on the human rights issues, maintaining the stability of the people and the children and the youth and whatever. We all have to work and function together. To work and function together, we have to understand the other person, you know, we have to understand the root cause of the Rohingya, the root cause of the Myanmar, and only focusing on the jurisdiction, only on focusing on the wounds which are bleeding, I mean, physically, but not, I mean, mentally. And in overall, it is very much important that there are you know, when in 2018, Rohingyas and the international community has a different approach to our cause, different approach to give us a justice, different approach how to take care of the humanitarian crisis. Now it has turned to the chronic side. Therefore, it is very much important that the jurisdiction like ICC, ICJ, Asan, and all those, they should try and have a unique way how to speed up the process, because it's not like the way that of course, sufferings are the same. You know, we cannot say that the Rwanda people have suffered less or we are suffering more. Palestinians are suffering more, we are suffering less. It's not about that thing. But, you know, there should be a unique way how to bring the perpetrators as soon as possible to the accountability, because it will help not only the Rohingya community and not only the Myanmar, but it will also help us overall to focus on other issues, you know, instead of only focusing on these issues. Secondly, it is very much important that the Bangladesh should understand that the Rohingyas leaving the country, they come further and they have been deprived further. If you don't believe, please come to the ground. You will see that the Rohingyas have been deprived further from their basic human rights. They are still been kept under the barbed wires. They have restrictions of movements, educations, livelihood everywhere, you know. And then on the other side, the instability or the ongoing genocide in Myanmar. And we see that our hope of returning to our country is not there. It will not be possible very soon. Same thing, resettlement. We are talking about the resettlement cannot be done with 1.6 million Rohingyas. Now, before 2017, it was 1 million. Now they say that the estimation is 1.6. So the resettlement is not the absolute solution. So therefore, what is the next step? How can we send these people and give them a safe zone in Myanmar? Or we do a resettlement to speed up the process, and till that we get our justice, how to take care of these Rohingyas living in Myanmar and other parts of the world. We are only focusing on the Myanmar and Bangladesh, but the Rohingyas are worldwide, and we are directly or indirectly suffering with the ongoing genocide. We are directly or indirectly victims and the survivors of the genocide. Therefore, the whole community, 4 million Rohingyas living in worldwide, should be taking care of them by focusing on their root cause, and not only focusing on the Myanmar or in Bangladesh, and also at the same time giving them the water or some ingredients of the food. That is not enough. We need a proper livelihood, the way you live, the way I live, the way we wish our generations to live. You just come on the ground, you will see that our children are malnourished, without no proper clothes. They are, instead of going to the school, instead of visiting the kindergartens or playing with their friends and all those, they're on the street, runny nose, with a lot of infections on their body. Their parents are with no hope, where to return and all those. So the system is still really very chaotic. People are not paying attention. Only superficially we are paying attention to our cause, but we need to really take care of them, not only physically, fundamentally. And to do that, it is very much important that they should be provided with a livelihood, to understand their rights, to function better in future, or to function normal in future, to contribute to their country, to contribute their community. The education should be the absolute tool for our Rohingyas. How come we have been deprived further, and nobody is really can melt the Bangladeshi government to give us a pen and a power and a book to write our own stories? Why we have been deprived further and left in the barbed wires? How can we develop a normal brain and develop a normal human being if we are deprived further? And the restrictions are further in other communities, in not only in Bangladesh, even in other countries we have to flee, like in Malaysia, Indonesia. Therefore, it is very much important that whatever the atrocities, the deprivation of the basic human rights should be not restricted to our community further, so that we as a community, as a resilient community, can function further. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Praveen. We have two questions that maybe Matt can help answer. The first one, it's related to the determining the act of genocide, and this is from Paul Hazel. He said that wouldn't disparate impact be enough? The other question is from Jeremy. He said, please address ration cuts in Cox's Bazar and effects for people's physical and psychological welfare.
Thanks for that, Zoom, and thanks to those who asked those questions. With regard to the ration cuts, I'm really glad that this question was asked, because it's a crucial issue. In March 2023, and then again in June 2023, funding cuts in the humanitarian response to the Rohingya crisis led the UN World Food Programme to basically slash food aid for Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. This is a concern. It increases the risk of acute malnutrition, which was already a problem, particularly among Rohingya children, even before the ration cuts. It increases the risk of infant mortality. It increases the risk of violence. It also increases the risk that Rohingya will effectively be forced to flee. And we've seen, human traffickers and transnational human trafficking syndicates are still operational in South and Southeast Asia. They do prey on the Rohingya population. Some years ago, we published a report called Sold Like Fish, which we produced with the National Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, Suhakam. And unfortunately, a lot of the trends that we documented back then, this was several years ago, are still they're still happening. And unfortunately, I think the food cuts contribute to that. The other question on disparate impact. This is a good question because genocidal acts, could have an indirect or disparate effects that still contribute to the destruction of the targeted group, in this case, the Rohingya. I'm not an expert on this particular area, but I do think evidence of disparate impact could help establish the gravity of the situation, the systemic nature of the harm that's being inflicted. It could contribute to a more comprehensive understanding of the genocidal process. But as far as I know, disparate impact alone may not be sufficient to establish the crime of genocide. I think prosecutors would still have to demonstrate the presence of the specific acts, the requisite intent to destroy. I think that would still be required. So, thanks so much.
Thank you, Matt. We will take a few more questions. This one is, I believe, can go to Aslan. This is from Shanmei Terry. I would like to know, how can we get evidence to prove that the perpetrator has special intention, which is the contextual element, to recognize as genocide? And what is the main thing we point out in the genocidal mental harm to make the special intention obvious?
Yes, I know. Thank you for that question. I think there's various ways of proving the special intent, the dolo specialis for acts of genocide. And as a previous question raised, do you have to have the special intent here with this? You do. And what we saw, for example, in the fact-finding mission reports was that the fact-finding mission identified 7 different factors that they saw as indicating very clearly that in the context of the clearance operations and other policies and practices of Myanmar around those operations, that the mission felt that the only reasonable inference from all of that information is that there was genocidal intent present. And they identified issues such as the brutality of the acts, the pervasive nature of sexual violence, the organized nature of the operations, the specific language used by the government officials and soldiers, the pervasiveness of hate speech in the country, and the discriminatory history of discriminatory laws within Myanmar itself, and specific laws targeting the Rohingya group. So these are examples of different contextual indicia that can show the specific intent. And I think for specifically when we're talking about mental harm, it depends on what we're looking at in the context of mental harm. So if there were acts of torture, maybe the individual who was engaging in those acts of torture was saying something or doing something, or if it was in the context of clearance operations, that can be seen as part of a broader indicia of intent. If you want to look at the idea of repression as a act of mental harm, so the pervasive net of discriminatory laws and policies, which are detailed in the report, the intent behind those laws has been expressed in a number of different ways by government officials when they talk about those laws, when they were advocating for them, when they were discussing why those laws are in place, but also the fact that some of those laws are specifically applied only to the Rohingya community shows that there is a direct intent there in terms of targeting the group. And some of those laws, again, the only result that you can see from them is making life so impossible for the Rohingya. And those sort of outcomes and those intentions and purposes and sort of contextual factors can all be potential indicia of special intent, dolo specialis, for an act of genocide.
Thank you so much, Aslan. We have a question on the work of Rohingya leaders. So this question is from the president of the Burmese American Muslims Association, Muang A. He asks, what are the panel recommendations for Rohingya leaders around the world to work together to end Rohingya genocide? I'm not sure if, yeah, okay, Sawin.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to really answer these questions. We've been working for Rohingya community for a long time. So we have seen there are so many types of divisions in between not only in between among the camp peoples, refugees, but also among the diaspora. It's very obvious. So I think we should really abandon the selfishness or their own objective, but we have to come to a common objective and be very strict words like leaving or abandoning the egos that we have, and then we should come forward together to work for this community, and we should really collaborate among us, including Fortify Rights. I mean, it's like we have to also support them. So it is very disheartening to see these Rohingyas are not united today in the Rohingya causes. So I really encourage the Rohingya leaders in diaspora and also in the camps to work together to come to a common goals to address this issue.
Thank you, Selwyn. Over to you, Dr. Praveen.
Thank you very much. And this is a very often question asked by our community, and especially the international one. Okay, it is very much important to understand why, you see, Rohingya community, you cannot compare them like the other ones, because this is a community who has been deprived from even their genes existed, that their mother came to know that she's pregnant, okay? How many months she has no idea, how many days she has, after how many days she will be delivering. From the day that he came, this child, or these genes, or this DNA came to existence, he knows that he will be further deprived. His generations, his parents, his grandparents have been deprived. So such kind of a community which has been deprived and have been oppressed, they will not be normal people. They cannot think proper like other people. They will not be functioning like others. So in this community, there will be some kind of abnormalities in thinking and in strategies, in perspectives, findings, and issues, and all those stuff. So we cannot await from this community to be a perfect nation like Americans, perfect nations like Europeans, perfect people, perfect decision makers. No, we cannot await from that, and we should not await. And there is a root cause, there is a reasons why they cannot be properly functioning like others. Second thing, I have also noticed that international community, when we are sitting all together, there is always saying there's a lack of unity, there's a lack of this, you don't have leadership. These words, the words that people are used even among us, we take the words from the international community, we say to our people, we have lack of unity, we are not functioning, we have no leaders, and all those. The words that used by the international community and the words that we are using among our Rohingyas should be also proper. If you say to a one person, constantly, you're dark, you're dark, you're dark, after 10 days, or after 10 months, he will believe he's a dark. So we have been always hammered that you have no leadership, you have no unity, and of course we will start believing in that thing. So therefore, there is a very, very too much important to understand that the words can harm us further, though harm us further, and we will going to start to believe that. Third thing, unity is very, very difficult. The definition of unity, I don't understand. Should we work all together in one country, which is impossible? Only 300 to 600 Rohingyas are left over. I might say that maybe less, right? So how can we, when we are all worldwide scattered, how can we be physically together, united, but morally, our visions are same. Morally, we are united. We are working for the same cause. I'm in Germany. Somebody's in Bangladesh. Somebody in States. The person who is asking. But our intention is to liberate our people, is to stop this genocide, is to go back to our homeland and to be a part of it. So we don't have to see that we all are physically sitting in one table and leading the community. So therefore, the definitions, the words, and hammering us with different words, and then telling us often that, that you people are not functioning. The bottle, just as an example, it's half empty and half full. Though we might not be functioning well the way the people wants to see, but they still have left to fill up with positive things. And the last one word that I wanted to say, the feminism is a very important issue for the international community. And all the time they are bringing in our community the feminism. If you go back in 50 years, 60 years in other civilized countries or continents, they were suffering the same thing the way we were suffering today. That does not mean that our Rohingya people are not going to improve or will not give justice to our women. And when we say that, women and the children have suffered the most in the Rohingya community, it is not true. In every community, it has suffered the most. And our men who really love their females and who really wants to protect And if their mother, if their sisters are raped and oppressed, that does not mean that they have not been triggered, that it does not harm them mentally, though they were not physically harmed. Therefore, the concept, the words, the way we raise our issues, the way we deprived the Rohingyas functioning community, it is very much important to see that they have a lot of positivity, and we can still fill up our bottle with positive issues by seeing the resilience and the functioning body of the Rohingya community. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Praveen. Before I close this Q&A session, I'd like to read some of the comments from Facebook. It has been more than a decade. This is from Mio Niang. It has been more than a decade since the Rohingya have been oppressed emotionally, mentally, and physically. For example, I was born in 1992 and have been suffering from serious mental harm since then. Sagar Amud says, the situation that is ongoing in Rakhine State is not okay. The Arakan army is killing the Rohingya. Another comment says, as a Rohingya refugee living in Bangladesh and volunteering as a mental health educator, I could realize proper mental health therapy is not the permanent solution to heal the Rohingyas' trauma. I would like to recommend not to ignore the Rohingya issues so that justice could not be delayed. Okay, now before we close, I'd like to give the floor to all the speakers for wrap-up comments. I'd like to start with Panu.
Thank you, Zoom. As a wrap-up, I like to just say that collective resilience concept and like how international sort of stakeholders could stand in solidarity and support to the Rohingya community. And one really important thing I want to point out is this is going to be a long-term work, sort of like generations of like, mental health support and accountability are going to be needed. So I also think about, while we are trying to support this like really high-risk community, we need to constantly ask questions to ourselves, like who care about this community? How can we better support? How can we show up for each other as well as for the community? And so from psychological research, I will share one insight that if we haven't found that answer, we need to ask different questions, like we need better questions. So like people who are serving the Rohingya community, and within Myanmar, while we are building collective resilience, I would like to urge us to think about, in our own lives as well as for the community, like what types of questions do I need to ask to keep building resilience in my own life and for my community.
Thank you so much, Panu. I now like to pass on the mic to Dr. Praveen for your wrap-up comments.
I would like to thank you, Zoom, and also the panelists and Fortify Rights. As I've said, my main intentions are really take care of our community, the mental hygiene, which is very much important. No matter what, we get the justice, we get food, we get water, we get pen, or we get a book, but we need to go back one day to our community and to our country. And it's very much important that our mental hygiene is protected. If we cannot, if our mental hygiene is harmed badly, we will not be able to function not for our individually, not for our existence, not to be able to function in our country. And also we will not be able to enjoy one day if Arsalan and ICC and ICJ would give us the justice, we will not be able to enjoy. Therefore, it is very much important that we focus on not only the Fortify Rights, but also the Rohingyas, the governments, international NGOs that focus on the mental hygiene of the Rohingya community. My last thing is that things have happened, are happening still, and I would really, really request that the international community focus on our children. As I've said, last week, my visit to the camp, I see that our community is depriving further, especially the children, from the further basic human rights, especially the education. We will not be able to understand and enjoy if we will not be educated. And today we are targeted by the Myanmar government and even the whole from our community, because we were deprived from the education. We never could stood for our rights. We could never write for our name. And therefore, in short, just to say that please make sure that the Rohingya community or Rohingya generation is not lost, and not to be lost. Give us the pen and the book so that we can write our own stories with our own languages, not by the language that the international community wants to hear and wants to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Praveen. Arslan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Zoom. I just wanted to reiterate my thanks and congratulations to Fortify Rights and the Lowenstein Clinic at Yale Law School for this very important report. And for those following the ICJ case and the other accountability mechanisms, I know that it's frustrating the slow pace with which these procedures function and how slow it has gone. But I do think we are now in a period where we're rapidly approaching the merits hearing, which I think will be a very important moment in the effort for accountability. So thank you for all who have been following that process and supporting it in various ways, including by doing very important and necessary human rights documentation work. So thank you.
Thank you, Arslan. Selwyn, would you like to give the final comments?
Thanks. Yeah, I would like to really thanks to the speakers here today. They really have said very well addressed the issues that we are talking today. And without their mental health, nobody can live a peaceful life. So this is very much important for everyone, not only Rohingya, but also for everybody in the world. But so that's why we have to think that way, that the way we are living our lives. So there's also the Rohingya community, Rohingya refugee deserve this life. So we have to always keep in our mind. And as Fortify Rights as a whole, we'll keep working for these issues in going forward in the future as well. We'll keep supporting the Rohingya community as the way we did in the past. And it is very important for us to uplift their life in terms of every aspect, not only in the Rohingya refugees, but also in Rakhine State, how they are facing the conscriptions issues, that they are unavoidable. They cannot flee from there. Their roads are blocked and they have nowhere to flee. So we have to all keep in mind all those hardship of the Rohingya community, and we all have to work together to provide the justice for the Rohingya community. And we have to support in a collaborative way to all the accountability mechanism that is happening today in the world for Rohingya community. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Selwyn. Matt, last but not least.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm glad Dr. Praveen brought up the concept of liberation. I think liberation, freedom, human rights for Rohingya and all people in Myanmar is the goal, are the goals. And I also just wanted to say that we do have hope. I think we are in many ways driven by hope. I think there's evidence for hope. That evidence for hope, to me, comes from people like Arslan working to hold the state of Myanmar accountable for the Rohingya genocide. It comes from people like Panu and Dr. Praveen and 𝙤𝙤 and Zoom and the rest of our colleagues. It comes from those working at the International Criminal Court, grinding day in and day out to do their important work. It comes from Rohingya themselves, and so we do have hope. And I just wanted to also just in closing thank everybody again for who made this event possible. There are a lot of hands behind the scenes to make sure that these live streams are smooth and that people can join and participate. So thank you to everybody who had a hand in this event. And thank you again to everybody who took time out of your busy schedules to join us today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Matt. In closing, I'd like to thank all speakers for joining us today, this morning. Please download the study if you haven't. In the next few days, we'll continue to upload social media posts on the report, including a summary film by our multimedia team. Please help us share our work as we continue to press for a stronger course of international actions. Thank you for joining us and have a great day.